This is Toma, built on strength, sharpened by discipline, grounded in ownership. I'm Jason Bowler. Rest, don't rust. Let's get to work. We all know a guy like this, maybe several guys like this. Hell, if you've paid any attention to what's going on in Washington, I guess probably since I was born, then you know people like this. A legend in their own mind with no stories to back it up whatsoever. That describes at least half of Washington, D.C., maybe all of them. I don't know. I'm sure there are a few exceptions. I'm talking about little men who went to private school, then got a first class ticket to an Ivy League education, and jumped straight into politics. I mean, sure, they all have their tales about how their daddy made them bale hay in the summer or mow grass or something like that to try to trick themselves and others into believing that they're just like the rest of us peasants, but they always got a take on everything. They're always certain about everything. They have all the answers. They're always explaining everything. They're always correcting. They're not loud because they're confident. They're loud because silence exposes them. And the more you keep talking, the less people will ask questions of you and find out that maybe you're a little bit of a fraud, right? And you start to realize that nothing's ever pressed them, nothing's ever demanded that they be restrained, especially nowadays. Nothing's ever forced them to sit in discomfort long enough to change them for the better. Then there's the other guy, the guy that avoids the political world like the plague, not because he wouldn't do a better job than some of the ones that are up there. He certainly has a lot of integrity and he's certainly been tested, but it's because they simply don't see themselves for the leaders that they are. This isn't just about the political world. You see it at every job site, you see it in every business, you see it in every team like environment. I'm talking about the quiet one, the dependable one, the man who handles his business and says almost nothing. And if you listen there, you'll notice something too. That person's often carrying a lot of weight that no one sees. They're often carrying that weight alone. And a lot of or most men live stuck in one of those two extremes. Either they talk a lot and have nothing to say because they've not lived a life worth speaking on, or they've lived a hell of a life and they rarely speak at all. But neither one are the ideal situation. There is the rare man, though, the dangerous man in a good way. That becomes both. The challenge for the talker is to live a life that gives weight to what he has to say. And the challenge for the strong silent type is to realize the disservice he's doing to others by keeping quiet when he could be helping others through leadership. So, why does it seem like most men fall into one of these two categories? Why can't they seem to speak clearly? Well, if you haven't been tested physically, mentally, emotionally, you don't really have wisdom. You have commentary. The man who is not and has never been in the arena, because hardship gives words weight. Pain gives words precision. Discipline teaches a man when to speak and when to hold the line. So watch the pattern. Men who've never struggled talk constantly. Men who struggle deeply often say nothing. One hasn't earned his voice, the other buried his voice. Neither is a complete man, neither is a full man, because strength without articulation becomes isolation, and articulation without strength is just a bunch of noise. And we're not trying to pick a side. Which one am I going to be? The strong, silent type or the guy that has commentary on everything but has never been truly tested side? The goal is, if you remember the movie The Band of Brothers, or series Band of Brothers, one of my favorites. I watch it every year close to D-Day. And before each episode they interviewed, there were still some living members of Easy Company at the time, which is what the Band of Brothers is about. It's about Easy Company in World War II and everything that they went through. And they had little mini interviews with those men before each episode would start, and you could feel the weight. Everything they said, every word that left their mouth hit like a ton of bricks to me. And if you've seen it, I'm sure you felt the same. But those guys had something to say. And we're all better off having heard it if you've heard it. It was powerful, it was meaningful. We wouldn't have gotten that same feeling if someone who wasn't in Easy Company was talking about what Easy Company had done. It doesn't matter how many books they read on it, how many people they interviewed. They could be a full-on professor expert on Easy Company, but if they weren't in Easy Company, whatever they have to say is good information to have. And I guess we can take their word for it. They're well studied, but they didn't live it. And so the men from Easy Company put it out there, and a lot of them teared up while they were talking, because they could still feel like they were there. And that's where the power comes from. When a strong man, a warrior, becomes a poet warrior, someone who can express themselves, someone who can lead. People with integrity don't talk enough, and people without integrity often suck all the air out of the room, talking way too damn much. And so, what if the men of Easy Company never told their story? We'd never know how to fully appreciate the sacrifices that they went through to help us win the war. So, their voices as the men in the arena, that's who we want to hear from. The men who's been in the arena. That's the thing. So if you haven't been in the arena but you want to be a leader, you need to start challenging yourself. And if you've been in the arena and you never talk about it and you never step up and use your knowledge and your wisdom and your experiences to help others, maybe you need to start talking a tad more. Cuz men are raised under one of two lies, okay? The first lie is that real men don't talk, which I think is an unspoken mantra in my family. I swear I can go 6 months without seeing my family, and we get together on a holiday or something, and we're lucky to have a 5-minute conversation total the whole time we're there. And most of those conversations are centered around how delicious the food is and what you've been up to, man, not much working. That's about all you're going to get. You're not going to have much deep conversation. And it's not because they don't have anything to say. It's not because they aren't strong men. On the contrary, they are very strong men, hardworking men. It's just that they think talking's for the birds, and they kind of look down on people that talk too much. It kind of aggravates them a little bit. And then there are those who are on the opposite end of that spectrum who thinks talking fixes everything. And maybe that's why some in my family rarely say anything, because I have others, and I think all families are this way, who talk a lot. So there are times, though, when it's best just to sit in a feeling and not say anything. And that's when the over talkers probably need to learn to tone it down a little bit. Talking isn't maturity and silence isn't strength. So that's what I'm getting at here. Control is. So a mature man speaks the same way that he trains, with intention, with structure, with restraint. There's no emotional dumps there. You're not spilling your guts every time you open your mouth. They don't emotionally disappear either. They don't refuse to speak their mind or their feelings on things just because it's not worth the hassle. So there's a balance. And that's what we talk about a lot without actually coming out and saying it on here, is a balance between physical, mental, emotional, spiritual things are in. If those things are in balance, then we're living a pretty good life. Whatever happens, we can pretty much roll with it and handle it like the strong men that we are if we have those things in balance. If we don't have those things in balance, if just one of those things is out of balance, then we're not complete. And that's what we're looking at, trying to be complete. So the man that can speak when he needs to speak and have something to say based on experience, based on hardships, based on struggle, that's the man everybody wants to listen to. When he speaks, he delivers. It's clean, it's measured, it's direct, it's not softness. Okay. And so before we can get to that point, in my view, there has to be some strength involved. And I'm talking about physical strength. You may not think physical strength has anything to do with the verbal or expressing yourself aspect of life, but that's not true. The body trains the mind how to speak. The sharper your body, the sharper your thoughts. So when you train, you're also pushing past comfort. You're getting used to being uncomfortable. You're getting used to a certain amount of pain. And when you endure something hard without running away from it, without escaping it, then you learn also emotional regulation, which comes out in your speech. So if someone, for example, gets up in the morning and they really don't feel like running, and not only do they go run anyway, but they run beyond what they initially told themselves they would. So I don't feel like running, but I guess I'll go run a mile. And then a mile into it, they're like, I got 2 miles in me. I might have 3 miles in me. Being able to do stuff like that, you're controlling your body. And then when you go to speak later on, your words are going to match what you just did with your body. You're going to be more measured. You're going to be more in control. You're going to be less likely to have an emotional outburst. And you're probably going to be feeling pretty good and not shut down either. You're probably going to be okay with like having a conversation. Things don't get on your nerves as much. So you learn how to stay steady when discomfort shows up. And that steadiness transfers over because a steady nervous system produces measured words. And that's why men who never challenge themselves physically tend to react emotionally. And so we need men who consistently test themselves. And I had this conversation the other day, speaking of the country as a whole. Change for the better starts at the top, maybe in a company or, at the team level, maybe a coach starts with a coach, then maybe the quarterback, and then kind of trickles down, you lead by example type of thing. But in a country of 340 million people, as jacked up as things seem to be, change is not going to start at the top. They have no reason to change. So it has to start at the bottom. That means individually first, we as men have to start checking ourselves and be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And no one can stop us from doing that. No one can stop us from eating right, or at least not eating junk. No one can stop us from exercising. No one can stop us from controlled speech that's not overly emotional. No one can stop us from reading and getting smarter and becoming better humans. No one can stop us from doing whatever we want to do for ourselves. And then once we master that, or at least are on the way to mastering that, then guess what? We can go help our neighbor. And then we can help our little community, our neighborhood. Then we can help our town. Then we can get involved and help our state, then our region, then our country. Now, think about that. If every man decided to be the best version of themselves they could be and then took that out into the world, it wouldn't matter what the top did because the change would start at the bottom and work its way up. So, something to think about. But we must become warriors before we can become poets, right? Because without discipline, then when you go to express yourself, it comes out as fragile. And the last thing we need is more fragile people in the world. So, how to find our voice without losing our edge at the same time? So, when you do speak, people lean in to hear what you got to say. Not because you're loud, not because you're emotional, not because you come in and chest out and try to dominate the room. It's because they can feel it. They know that the words coming out of your mouth cost you something. You had to pay for those words. The people I'm going to interview on here had to pay for their words. And I hope they have a lot to say. I feel like I've paid for the words coming out of my mouth. And so go out there, struggle, and pay for it, and then go out and pass that wisdom along. Who knows who will listen and who won't, but it's worth a shot. And that's how a warrior learns to speak. So as we go on this month, we're going to be getting into the idea of being a warrior physically and physically challenging ourselves, but also being a thinking man. And our guest at the end of the month is going to culminate into that perfect thing, someone who has been on the battlefield and someone who has a great mind. If this episode meant something to you, pass it on, subscribe, leave a review, share it with someone who needs it. Strength is built daily. Rest when you must, but don't rust. We'll see you next Tuesday.